Robert was having one of those quiet Tuesday evenings that he'd grown to love since retiring. The kind where the biggest decision was whether to watch the news or read another chapter of his mystery novel. At 72, these peaceful moments felt like small gifts after 40 years of dealing with teenagers as a high school math teacher. He had just settled into his favorite armchair with a cup of coffee when he heard it. A soft, hesitant knock on his front door. Not the confident rap of a delivery person or the familiar rhythm of his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. This was different, careful, almost afraid. Robert set down his coffee and walked to the door, his slippers shuffling against the hardwood floor. Through the small window he could see two small figures standing on his porch under the yellow light. Children, at this hour? It was already past 7, and the sun had set an hour ago. When he opened the door, his heart immediately went out to what he saw. Two kids stood there, both looking up at him with eyes that seemed too old for their faces. The older one, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8, was holding a cardboard box. The kind you might use to ship books, but this one had small holes punched carefully around the sides. Her little brother, maybe 6 years old, stood close beside her, one small hand gripping the edge of her worn jacket. "Hi, Mr. Robert," the girl said, her voice shaky but determined. "I'm sorry to bother you so late." Robert recognized them immediately. They lived just a few blocks down in the small blue house with the chain-link fence. He'd seen them playing in their tiny front yard countless times during his evening walks. Always together, always watching out for each other. Their mother was a young woman who worked at the downtown diner. He'd seen her hurrying to catch the bus in her uniform, looking tired but always managing a polite wave when their paths crossed. "It's no bother at all," Robert said gently, crouching down to their eye level. "What brings you two here tonight?" The girl took a deep breath, like she was gathering all her courage. "We need to ask you something really important. Can you buy our kitten? Our mom is really sick and we need money to help her get better." The words hit Robert like a punch to the chest. He looked at the box in her arms and could now hear the faint mewing coming from inside. The little boy nodded seriously as if confirming his sister's words. "She's the best kitten in the whole world," the boy added quietly. "But Mommy needs medicine and we don't have any money left." Robert felt his throat tighten. In all his years of teaching, he'd learned to read between the lines when kids were in trouble. These children weren't just trying to sell a pet. They were desperately trying to help their mother in the only way they knew how. "Would you like to come inside for a minute?" he asked softly. "Maybe we can talk about this." The children looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that only siblings can have. The girl nodded, and Robert stepped aside to let them in. His living room suddenly felt different with two small visitors. They sat carefully on the edge of his couch, the box between them like a precious treasure. The girl kept one protective hand on top of it while the boy swung his legs, his feet not quite touching the floor. "What are your names?" Robert asked, settling into his chair across from them. "I'm Lucy," the girl said, "and this is my brother Tommy. We live on Maple Street." "Nice to meet you both properly," Robert said. "Now, can you tell me more about your mom? What's wrong?" Lucy's composure cracked a little. "She got sick at work 3 days ago. She just fell down. And then the ambulance came and took her to the hospital. Mrs. Garcia next door is watching us. But she can't really take care of us for long because she's old and her back hurts." Tommy nodded and added, "The doctors say Mommy has something in her lungs that makes it hard to breathe. And she needs special medicine to get better." Robert's heart ached listening to them. These children were trying to be so brave, so grown-up, when they should have been worried about homework and bedtime stories, not medical bills and family survival. "Can I see your kitten?" he asked gently. Lucy's face lit up a little as she carefully opened the box. Inside was the tiniest orange tabby Robert had ever seen, barely bigger than his palm. The kitten looked up at them with bright green eyes and let out a small, sweet meow. "Her name is Sunshine," Lucy said, gently stroking the kitten's head with one finger. "We call her Sunny for short. Mommy saved up for 3 months to buy her for my birthday. She said every little girl should have a best friend. Sunny sleeps with Lucy every night, Tommy added. And she plays with bottle caps and chases shadows on the wall. She's really funny. Robert watched as Lucy lifted the kitten from the box. Sunny immediately curled up in her small hands, purring loudly. The love between this child and her pet was obvious. This wasn't just a kitten to them, this was family. How much money do you think you need? Robert asked carefully. The children looked at each other again. We don't really know, Lucy admitted. Mrs. Garcia said hospital bills cost lots and lots of money. Maybe maybe $50? We thought maybe you might want to buy Sunny because you live alone and might want a friend. $50? Robert almost smiled at their innocence, but his heart was breaking instead. These children had no idea that hospital bills could easily reach thousands of dollars. They were trying to solve an enormous problem with their tiny, precious offering. Lucy, Tommy, he said gently, can you tell me more about what happened? To your mom? Lucy took a shaky breath. She was working at the diner like always, but she'd been coughing a lot lately and looking really tired. More tired than usual. She kept saying she was fine, but I could tell she wasn't. Then Mrs. Garcia got a phone call saying Mommy collapsed and they had to take her to the emergency room. The doctors won't let us see her yet, Tommy added sadly. They say she needs to rest and get better first? But Mrs. Garcia heard them talking about how Mommy doesn't have insurance and the bills are already really big. Robert felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. Not at these children, of course, but at a system that could put a hard-working mother and her innocent kids in such an impossible situation. He'd seen this before during his teaching years. Good families destroyed by medical emergencies they couldn't afford to handle. You know what? Robert said, standing up slowly. I think we need to talk about this properly. But first, are you too hungry? It's getting late, and I bet you haven't had dinner yet. The children exchanged that look again. Mrs. Garcia made us sandwiches, Lucy said politely. But thank you. Robert could tell they were being polite rather than truthful. Well, I was just about to make some hot chocolate. Would you like some? And maybe Sunny would like a little bit of milk? For the first time since they'd arrived, both children smiled. Real, genuine smiles that reminded Robert that despite everything they were dealing with, they were still just kids. As he headed to the kitchen to make the hot chocolate, Robert's mind was already working. These children had come to him in their hour of desperate need, trusting him with their most precious possession. They had no idea that they'd just changed his life completely. While Robert heated milk on the stove, he could hear the children's quiet voices from the living room. They were whispering to their kitten, probably trying to explain what was happening. The sound broke his heart all over again. When he returned with 3 steaming mugs and a small saucer of warm milk for Sunny, he found Lucy and Tommy sitting exactly where he'd left them, still holding their precious pet like she might disappear. If they let go? Here we are, Robert said, setting the tray down on his coffee table. Careful, it's hot. Tommy's eyes went wide at the sight of the hot chocolate topped with tiny marshmallows. Wow, this looks just like the kind they make at the fancy coffee shop downtown. Lucy smiled for the first time that evening as she watched Sunny lap up the warm milk. She likes it, she said softly. Mommy always said cats shouldn't have regular milk, but she said a tiny bit of warm milk was okay for special times. Your mom sounds like a smart woman, Robert said, settling back into his chair. Tell me more about her. The children's faces brightened immediately. It was clear that despite their current troubles, they loved their mother deeply. Her name is Christina, Lucy said. She works really, really hard. Sometimes she has to work both the morning shift and the night shift at the diner, especially when other people don't show up. She always says she's doing it so we can have a better life someday. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. And she makes the best pancakes in the whole world. Every Sunday, even when she's super tired, she makes us special pancakes shaped like animals. Last week she made me a pancake that looked like a dinosaur. She helps me with my homework every night too, Lucy added. Even when she gets home really late and her feet hurt from standing all day, she sits with me at the kitchen table and we do math problems together. She says education is the most important thing and that I'm going to be something really special when I grow up. Robert could picture it perfectly. A young mother, probably not much older than his own daughter, working herself to exhaustion to provide for her children. The kind of parent who sacrificed everything for their kids without ever making them feel guilty about it. What about your dad? Robert asked gently, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The children's expressions grew more serious. He left when Tommy was still a baby, Lucy explained matter-of-factly. Mommy says some people just aren't ready to be parents, and that's okay because we have each other and that's all we need. Mommy says we're a team, Tommy added. The three of us against the world. But now she's sick and we don't know how to help her. Robert felt his chest tighten again. These children had been through so much already, and now they were facing the possibility of losing the one person who held their little family together. Lucy, Tommy, he said carefully, do you understand what's wrong with your mom? What the doctors told Mrs. Garcia? Lucy nodded slowly. Mrs. Garcia explained it to us. She said Mommy has something called pneumonia, which means her lungs are infected and full of bad stuff that makes it hard for her to breathe. The doctors have to give her medicine through a tube in her arm and oxygen through a mask to help her breathe better. But the medicine costs a lot of money, Tommy said, his voice getting smaller. And since Mommy doesn't have insurance, we have to pay for everything ourselves. Mrs. Garcia said the bill might be thousands and thousands of dollars. That's why we thought of selling Sunny, Lucy continued. She's the only valuable thing we have. Mommy spent all her savings to buy her for my birthday. We figured if we could get maybe $50 or $100, it might help pay for some of the medicine. Robert had to take a sip of his hot chocolate to hide the emotion in his voice. These children were trying to solve an adult problem with a child's understanding of money and value. They had no idea that even if they sold everything they owned, it wouldn't make a dent in a hospital bill. Can I ask you both something? Robert said. What will happen if your mom doesn't get better quickly? Who will take care of you? The question hung in the air for a moment. Lucy and Tommy looked at each other with that wordless communication again. We don't really have any other family, Lucy admitted. Mommy's parents died when she was young, and Daddy's family lives far away and we've never met them, Mrs. Garcia said she'd try to keep us for a while, but she's 78 and she can barely take care of herself. The social worker came to talk to us yesterday, Tommy added quietly. She was nice, but she said if Mommy stays in the hospital too long, they might have to find us a temporary place to stay. Maybe even separate places. Robert felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. These children weren't just facing the loss of their mother's health. They were facing the potential destruction of their entire family. But we're not going to let that happen, Lucy said with sudden determination. That's why we have to help Mommy get better. That's why we need to sell Sunny, even though it makes us really sad. She lifted the kitten up to her face, nuzzling the soft orange fur. I'm sorry, Sunny, she whispered. I know Mommy said you were supposed to be my forever friend, but right now Mommy needs help more than I need a pet. Robert watched this 8-year-old girl trying to make an impossible adult decision, and something inside him shifted permanently. He thought about his own comfortable retirement, his healthy bank account, his quiet house that sometimes felt too empty. He thought about all the students he'd taught over the years, and how many of them had come from families just like this one. You know, he said slowly, I've been thinking about your situation and I have an idea. But first I need to ask you something important. Do you trust me? Both children nodded without hesitation. Good, Robert continued. Because I want to help your family, but not by buying Sunny. I think there might be a better way to solve this problem. A way that lets you keep your kitten and helps your mom get better. Lucy's eyes widened. Really? How? Well, Robert said, leaning forward in his chair, it turns out that sometimes grown-ups have resources that kids don't know about. And sometimes when people have been lucky in their lives, they like to share that luck with families who really need it. Tommy tilted his head, confused. What kind of resources? Robert smiled gently. The kind that can pay hospital bills. The kind that can make sure your mom gets all the medicine she needs without you having to give up anything you love. The children stared at him in amazement, as if he'd just told them he could make their mother appear by magic. "But why would you do that for us?" Lucy asked. "We're not your family." Robert looked at these two brave, loving children sitting in his living room, holding their kitten and trying to save their mother, and realized that his answer was simpler than they could possibly understand. "Because," he said softly, "sometimes the best families are the ones we choose." Robert couldn't sleep that night. After walking Lucy and Tommy back to Mrs. Garcia's house, he'd returned to his quiet living room. But the silence felt different now, heavier, the image of those two children clutching their kitten, willing to sacrifice their most precious possession to save their mother, kept playing in his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off. He sat in his armchair until nearly midnight, staring at the spot where they'd sat on his couch. Their hot chocolate mugs were still on the coffee table, tiny marshmallow remnants stuck to the bottom. Such a small thing, but it reminded him that just a few hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether to watch the late news or read another chapter of his book. Now everything had changed. Robert had always been a practical man. 40 years of teaching high school math had taught him to think logically, to solve problems step by step. But this wasn't a math problem. This was about a family falling apart, and he was probably the only person in a position to catch them. Before they hit the ground, he walked to his home office and pulled out his financial records. Bank statements, retirement accounts, savings bonds he'd been holding for years. Numbers that had once represented security for his golden years now looked different. What good was financial security if he couldn't use it to help when it really mattered? His late wife Helen would have known what to do immediately. She'd always been the one with the big heart, the one who brought home stray cats and made extra casseroles for neighbors going through hard times. Robert had been the cautious one, the planner, the one who worried about having enough saved for emergencies. Well, he thought this was someone's emergency. And if Helen were still here, she'd already be making plans to help Dot by morning. Robert had made his decision. But he also knew he needed help to do this right. At 7:30, he called his daughter Karen in California. "Dad?" she answered on the second ring, concern in her voice. "Is everything okay? You never call this early?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Robert said, "but I need some advice." "Professional advice?" Karen was a social worker at a children's hospital in Los Angeles. If anyone would know how to navigate this situation properly, it would be her. Robert told her everything. About Lucy and Tommy showing up at his door, about their mother, Christina, in the hospital, about the children's desperate plan to sell their kitten, about his decision to help Dot. Karen listened without interrupting, which Robert appreciated. When he finished, there was a long pause. "Dad," she said finally, "what you want to do is wonderful. But you need to be careful about how you do it. There are protocols, legal considerations. If you just show up at the hospital with a check, it could create problems for the family." "What kind of problems?" "Well, for one thing, there might be questions about where the money came from. And depending on the family situation, sudden financial help could affect their eligibility for certain assistance programs. Plus, you need to make sure this is done in a way that preserves their dignity." Robert hadn't thought about any of that. He just wanted to help. "So what do I do?" he asked. "Let me make some calls," Karen said. "I have contacts at hospitals. Back there, we can figure out the best way to handle this. Maybe work through the hospital's financial assistance program, or find a way to make it look like help from a charity rather than an individual. Give me a few hours." After hanging up, Robert felt both frustrated and relieved. Frustrated because he wanted to act immediately, but relieved because Karen would help him do this right. While he waited for her callback, Robert decided to visit the hospital himself. Not to pay bills or make grand gestures, but just to see Christina and understand the situation better. The hospital was a 20-minute drive from his house. Robert had been there many times over the years, mostly for routine checkups, but the atmosphere felt different when you were walking through those doors because of a crisis rather than a scheduled appointment. The information desk directed him to the third floor. As he rode the elevator up, Robert rehearsed what he would say. He'd simply introduce himself as a concerned neighbor and ask if there was anything he could do to help. But when he found Christina's room, he hesitated outside the door. Through the small window, he could see a young woman lying in the hospital bed, oxygen tubes in her nose, 4 lines in her arm. She looked so small and fragile, nothing like the energetic mother he'd occasionally seen chasing after her children. In their front yard, Robert knocked softly and waited for permission to enter. "Come in," came a weak voice from inside. Christina's eyes widened in surprise when she saw him. "Mr. Robert?" "From Pine Street? What are you doing here?" "I hope you don't mind me visiting," Robert said, stepping into the room. "Your children came to see me last night. They were worried about you." Christina's face immediately flushed with embarrassment. "Oh, no. What did they want? I'm so sorry if they bothered you." Mrs. Garcia was supposed to be watching them. "They weren't a bother at all," Robert assured her, pulling up the visitor's chair. "They're remarkable children. You should be very proud." Tears welled up in Christina's eyes. "They shouldn't have to worry about any of this. They're just babies. Lucy tries to act so grown up, but she's only 8. And Tommy still asks me to check for monsters under his bed." "They love you very much," Robert said gently. "They came to me because they wanted to help you get better." "They were trying to sell their kitten to raise money for your medical bills?" Christina closed her eyes, and tears leaked out the corners. "Their kitten," she whispered. "I saved for months to buy Sunny for Lucy's birthday. She'd been asking for a pet for so long, and I finally had enough extra money to get her something special. And now they think they have to give her up because of me." "Christina," Robert said, "may I ask you something personal? What's your situation here? With the bills, I mean." She opened her eyes and looked at him with a mixture of shame and desperation. "It's bad," she admitted, "really bad. I don't have insurance through the diner because I'm technically part-time, even though I work more than 40 hours a week. The emergency room visit alone was over $3,000. And now with the pneumonia treatment, medications, staying here, I don't even want to know what the total is going to be. What will happen if you can't pay?" "I don't know," Christina said, her voice breaking. "They're not going to kick me out while I'm still sick, but eventually the bills will go to collections. My credit will be ruined. I might have to declare bankruptcy. And if I can't work because of this, I don't know how I'll keep the house or take care of Lucy and Tommy." Robert felt that familiar anger rising again. Here was a hard-working mother, who'd done everything right, brought down by a medical emergency that could happen to anyone. "Christina," he said carefully, "what if I told you that might not have to happen? What if there was a way to take care of these bills without destroying your family's future?" She looked at him with confusion and a glimmer of hope. "What do you mean?" Before Robert could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from Karen. "Dad, I've got a plan. Call me when you can." Robert smiled at Christina. "I mean that sometimes help comes from unexpected places, and sometimes neighbors look out for each other in ways you might not expect." He stood up, feeling more determined than he had in years. "You focus on getting better, Christina. Let the adults worry about the adult problems. Your job is to get healthy so you can go home to those wonderful children of yours." As he walked back to his car, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: purpose. For the first time since Helen's death, he had something truly important to do. Robert called Karen back as soon as he got to his car in the hospital parking lot. His hands were slightly shaking as he dialed, not from nervousness but from the weight of what he'd just witnessed. Seeing Christina lying in that hospital bed, so young and vulnerable, had made everything feel more real and urgent. "Dad, perfect timing," Karen answered immediately. "I've been working on this all morning. I think I have a solution that will work for everyone." "Tell me," Robert said, settling back in his driver's seat. "Okay, so I talked to my friend Jennifer, who works in patient financial services at hospitals back east. Here's what we can do. Most hospitals have something called a charity care program or financial hardship assistance. They're designed exactly for situations like this. What we need to do is help Christina apply for this program, and then you can make a donation to the hospital's general charity fund. Robert frowned. But won't that take forever? Don't these programs have waiting lists and paperwork that takes months? That's where it gets interesting, Karen continued. Jennifer explained that when hospitals have donors willing to contribute to their charity programs, they can fast-track cases, especially when it's a clear-cut situation like this. A single mother with no insurance, working multiple jobs, sudden medical emergency. It's exactly what these programs are designed for. So I can help without it looking like I'm just some stranger throwing money at their problems? Exactly. And here's the best part. The hospital gets to count your donation toward their community service requirements. Christina gets her bills taken care of through an official program she actually qualifies for. And your help stays anonymous if you want it to. Robert felt a wave of relief wash over him. Karen, you're brilliant. How do we start? I'm emailing you Jennifer's contact information right now. She's going to call the Financial Services Department at Christina's hospital this afternoon. They should be able to meet with Christina tomorrow to start the paperwork. The whole process could be done within a week. After hanging up with Karen, Robert sat in the parking lot for a few more minutes, watching people come and go from the hospital. Families arriving with worried faces, others leaving with relief or sadness. Each person carrying their own story, their own crisis or celebration. He thought about Helen again. She'd always said that the best way to honor a good life was to help others live good lives too. Maybe this was his chance to do that. Robert drove home and spent the afternoon making calls. First to Jennifer, who turned out to be as helpful as Karen had promised, then to his bank to discuss transferring funds. By evening, he had a plan in motion that felt both generous and responsible. But there was something else he needed to do. He needed to check on Lucy and Tommy. Around 6 o'clock, Robert walked the 3 blocks to Mrs. Garcia's house. It was a small, neat home with flower boxes in the windows and a garden that showed more care than money. When he knocked, he could hear children's voices inside. Along with the sound of a television. Mrs. Garcia answered the door with a tired smile. She was a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes, but Robert could see the strain of the last few days on her face. Mr. Robert, she said in accented English, the children told me you were very kind to them last night. Please come in. The house smelled like home-cooked food and old-fashioned soap. Lucy and Tommy were sitting at a small dining table, coloring in books, while Sonny slept in a cardboard box lined with towels nearby. Mr. Robert. Tommy jumped up and ran to him. Did you come to see Sonny again? I came to see all of you, Robert said, ruffling the boy's hair. How are you doing today? Lucy looked up from her coloring. We went to see Mommy this morning, she said. She looked a little better, but she's still really tired. The doctor said she might have to stay for a few more days. Mrs. Garcia gestured for Robert to sit down at the table. Can I get you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. That would be nice, thank you. While Mrs. Garcia bustled around the kitchen, Robert sat with the children. Their coloring books were filled with pictures of families and houses and pets. Normal kid stuff that reminded him these were just ordinary children caught in an extraordinary situation. Mr. Robert, Lucy said quietly, we've been thinking about what you said last night. About helping Mommy without selling Sonny. Did you really mean it? I meant every word, Robert assured her. But how? Tommy asked. We don't understand how it works. Robert chose his words carefully. Well, sometimes adults have ways of solving problems that kids don't know about. Your mom is going to meet with some people at the hospital tomorrow who help families in situations like yours. There are programs designed to help people who work hard but don't have insurance. Lucy's eyes widened. You mean there are people whose job it is to help families like us? Exactly. And sometimes when people like me have been lucky in life, we like to support those programs so they can help families who really need it. Mrs. Garcia returned with coffee for Robert and juice boxes for the children. As she sat down, she looked at him with curiosity. The children said you want to help. Christina, she said. It's very kind, but I hope you understand. She's a very proud woman. She won't accept charity easily. I understand completely, Robert said. That's why we're doing it through the hospital's official assistance program. She'd be getting help. She actually qualifies for not charity from a stranger. Mrs. Garcia nodded approvingly. You are a wise man. Christina is like a daughter to me. I've watched her struggle to raise these children alone, working so hard, never complaining. She deserves help, but she deserves to keep her dignity too. Can I tell you something? Robert said, looking at all three of them. When I was younger, my wife and I went through a really difficult time. We had medical bills we couldn't pay, and we didn't know where to turn. An older lady in our neighborhood helped us, but she did it in a way that made us feel like we were part of a community, not like we were taking charity. What happened to her? Lucy asked. She became one of the most important people in our lives. Even after we were back on our feet, she remained a good friend. She taught us that helping each other isn't about one person being better than another. It's about being part of the same human family. Tommy nodded solemnly, though Robert wasn't sure how much the 6-year-old really understood. Mrs. Garcia, Robert continued, I'd like to ask you something. After Christina comes home and gets back on her feet, would you and the children be interested in having dinner at my house sometimes? My wife passed away 2 years ago, and my house gets pretty quiet. I think I'd enjoy the company. Mrs. Garcia's eyes filled with tears. I think Christina would like that very much. And I know the children would too. Can Sonny come too? Tommy asked hopefully. Robert laughed. Sonny is definitely invited. As he walked home that evening, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced since Helen's death. He felt like he was part of a family again. Not his old family, but a new kind of family, the kind that forms when people choose to care for each other. Tomorrow, Christina would meet with the financial counselor at the hospital. The paperwork would be filed, the donations would be processed, and a family's crisis would begin to resolve. But tonight, Robert was content knowing that sometimes the best solutions came not from grand gestures, but from simple human kindness. Wrapped in practical action, he was already looking forward to those future dinners, to the sound of children's laughter in his house again, to being part of something bigger than his quiet retirement. 3 weeks later, Robert was in his kitchen making pancakes when he heard the familiar sound of children's laughter from his backyard. Through the window, he could see Lucy and Tommy chasing Sonny around his garden while their mother Christina sat on his back porch, still moving carefully but looking healthier than she had since this whole ordeal began. It had become their Sunday morning tradition. After Christina was released from the hospital 8 days ago, the weekly breakfast had started almost by accident. Robert had invited them over to celebrate her homecoming, and when Tommy had mentioned missing his mom's famous animal-shaped pancakes, Robert had challenged himself to learn the skill. His first attempts had been disasters. Lumpy dinosaurs that looked more like abstract art, and a butterfly that Tommy had politely suggested might be a bat. But Christina had laughed for the first time in weeks at his efforts, and that sound had been worth every failed pancake. Mr. Robert, Lucy called. Through the window, Sonny caught a grasshopper. Should we let her keep it? What do you think, Lucy? He called back, flipping what he hoped would pass for elephant pancake. I think we should let it go, she decided. Grasshoppers probably have families too. Robert smiled as he watched her gently coax the insect away from the kitten and release it into the garden. At 8 years old, Lucy had developed a wisdom about families that many adults never learned. The hospital's charity care program had worked exactly as Karen had predicted. Christina's bills had been covered through the financial assistance program, with Robert's anonymous donation making it all possible. She'd never known the money came from him specifically, only that the hospital had approved her application with unusual speed. The Community Rally Fund, the financial counselor had called it, explaining that local donors sometimes contributed to help families in crisis. Christina had accepted the help with tears of gratitude, never suspecting that her community was actually the retired math teacher from 3 blocks away, who'd fallen in love with her children's brave hearts, but the money had been just the beginning. What surprised Robert most was how naturally they'd all begun to build a real relationship. It started with him checking on Christina during her recovery, bringing groceries when she was too weak to shop, helping Tommy with his reading while Lucy did homework at Robert's kitchen table. Christina had been hesitant at first, worried about accepting too much help. But when Robert had mentioned how quiet his house felt since Helen's death, something had shifted. She'd begun to understand that the help was flowing both ways. "You know," she'd said one evening as they all sat in his living room, "the kids have been happier these past 2 weeks than I've seen them in months. Not just because I'm getting better, but because they feel like they have ... more family now." And, they did have more family. Mrs. Garcia had become like a grandmother to Robert, bringing him homemade tamales and scolding him when he worked too long in his garden. Christina had insisted on cooking dinner for him twice a week, claiming she needed to practice her recipes anyway. The children had adopted his house as their second home, leaving coloring books on his coffee table and teaching Sonny to chase toy mice down his hallways. "Breakfast is ready," Robert announced, carrying a platter of pancakes to the back porch. Christina smiled as she saw his latest creations. "Let me guess," she said, pointing to the various shapes. "Elephant, butterfly, and ... does that supposed to be a dog?" "It's a lion," Robert said with mock dignity. "A very sleepy lion." Tommy giggled as he climbed into his chair. "It looks like a lion that got squished." "Tommy," Lucy warned, but she was smiling too. "It's okay," Robert laughed. "He's not wrong, but it'll taste just as good as a perfect lion." As they ate breakfast together, Robert marveled at how normal this had all become. A few weeks ago, he'd been a lonely widower counting down quiet days. Now his calendar was full of school plays, doctor's appointments, grocery shopping trips, and family dinners. His house felt alive again. "Mr. Robert," Lucy said, syrup on her chin, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you help us?" "I mean, really help us, not just buy Sonny like we asked?" Robert considered the question carefully. It was one he'd been asking himself too. "Do you remember what I told you about the lady who helped your mom and me when we were young?" he said finally. Both children nodded. "Well, she taught me something important. She said that people aren't meant to go through hard things alone. She said we're all connected like a big invisible family, and when one person is struggling, it's everyone's job to help if they can." "But you didn't even know us," Tommy pointed out. "That's true," Robert agreed. "But sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, not the ones we're born into. When you two showed up at my door that night, willing to give up your most precious thing to save your mom, I knew you were the kind of people I wanted in my life." Christina reached over and squeezed his hand. "You saved us," she said quietly. "Not just financially, but in every way that matters. Lucy and Tommy have a grandfather figure now. I have someone who helps me be a better parent. And Mrs. Garcia has someone to cook for besides herself." "And I have a family again," Robert said. "The best kind of family. The kind that chooses to stick together." Later that afternoon, after Christina and the children had gone home for Sunday naps, Robert was cleaning up the breakfast dishes when his phone rang. It was his son, David, calling from Seattle. "Dad, Karen told me about what you did for that family," David said. "I have to admit, when she first told me, I was worried you were being taken advantage of." "And now?" Robert asked. "Now I'm proud of you. Karen sent me pictures from your phone. You look happier than you have since Mom died." Robert glanced at his refrigerator, which was now covered with children's artwork, photos from their weekly adventures, and a hand-drawn calendar showing all their upcoming activities. Lucy had drawn a picture of all of them together, including Sonny, with the words "Our Chosen Family" written across the top in crayon. "I am happier," Robert admitted. "I thought helping them would be about giving something up, but it turns out I got back more than I gave." "That's exactly what Mom would have said," David told him after the call ended. Robert sat in his living room, looking at the changes in his house. Children's books stacked next to his mystery novels. A basket of toys in the corner for when they visited. Photos of Lucy's soccer games and Tommy's school programs mixed in with pictures of his own grandchildren. It wasn't the retirement he'd planned, but it was better than anything he could have imagined. Outside, he could see Christina hanging laundry in her backyard while the children played with Sunny in the grass. Normal Sunday afternoon things that felt precious because they'd almost been lost. Robert had learned something important over these past few weeks. Sometimes life's greatest gifts came disguised as other people's emergencies. Sometimes the family you needed was the one standing on your front porch, asking for help you didn't know you were ready to give. And sometimes, when you opened your door to let kindness in, you discovered that you'd been the one who needed rescuing all along.